In Chinese financial hub Shanghai, a homeowner took drastic measures as he saw no other way to protect his home from forced demolition by the authorities. A QR code to control the CCP virus outbreak and everything else is a common practice in China. But now this will affect foreigners visiting China too. Is Hong Kong's media still free? A TV station laid off an investigative section that reported on local police violence, and the team reporting human rights in China left too. Employees on Chinese vessels and flights have been interrogated while entering the U.S. It's to find out if they are members of the Chinese Communist Party. An Australian media published a real photo to fight against the fake photo from China, and a video campaign urges people to drink Australian wine to show solidarity against Chinese sanctions. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. One homeowner in Shanghai reportedly took extreme action in order to stave off forced demolition workers that had come to destroy his home. In protest, he ignited a gas tank, causing an explosion that destroyed his property and killed him at the scene.
A resident in China's Shanghai paid the ultimate price in trying to protect his home from destruction. In China, the practice of forced demolition has become commonplace. When the Chinese regime decides to use areas of land for new, often more profitable purposes, it simply sends workers to tear down any residential housing present. Homeowners are usually given little to no compensation and are left homeless. On Sunday, demolition workers arrived at the man's house. In an effort to stop the demolition, he ignited a gas tank on the property, causing an explosion that killed him on the spot. Several others also suffered severe injuries. The incident took place inside of one of Shanghai's most prosperous commercial areas. Homeowners there refuse to relocate. That's because compensation given by authorities is far from enough to buy a new, comparably priced home. One woman from the neighborhood told us that few households there still remain, and property developers have already arranged the sale of the land. She explained that at the time of the explosion, the homeowner was at home with his son. His wife was away taking care of their pregnant daughter-in-law at the hospital. At around 7 o'clock in the morning, the demolition workers began using force to try to take the man's son away.
The father was so desperate that he threw the gas tank. He died immediately. There's nothing he could do but fight back this way because ordinary people have no power or influence.
Another forced demolition victim from the area shared a video online back in early November. It accused the regime of robbing him of his private property and of violating multiple laws.
The regime sold Yongjiadu Lot 3 to property developer Greentown Group, and the company has been holding the land for 20 years. Now the district government is acting as the developer's hired hatchet man. I will defend my home until my last breath and willingly die along with the invaders.
Holding land for that long can cause major problems. That's because in China, when a person of company purchases property, they become the owner of the building. But the land the structure is built on still belongs to the regime. In addition, the regime sets a time limit for land usage rights, normally around 70 years for residential land. The clock starts ticking immediately once the land is bought by a developer. In this case, the developer's decision to hold the land for 20 years means that the homeowners will be left with a maximum of 50 years to use the land. When that time expires, they'll be forced to pay fees to renew the land rights if authorities give the green light. But if the regime refuses to grant another term, or if it wants the land back before that time expires, it leads to the violent forced demolitions that have become commonplace. According to Chinese law, homeowners maintain their rights to their properties as long as the properties exist. The loophole is often exploited. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
And a new regulation from the Chinese embassy. All U.S. travelers headed to China will soon be required to carry an approved QR health code to enter the country. The codes are used to monitor users' whereabouts and their recent virus test information. We go to NTD's Don Ma for the story.
Starting December 1st, everyone traveling from the U.S. to China must obtain a QR code issued by the U.S.-Chinese embassy. According to the Chinese embassy's website, passengers bound for China are first required to take virus tests, as well as submit their results, passport, itinerary, and other documents to the Chinese embassy. Travelers will then be issued a health declaration certificate, or HDC QR code from the Embassy General. In China, the barcodes are used to store information. When scanned, they reflect the person's virus testing status and are also used for contact tracing and tracking cross-border travel. The new regulation comes on the heels of the QR code proposal imposed by Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping. He says he hopes more countries will adopt the system. But Executive Director of an NGO, Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth, warned in a Twitter post that the QR code system will be used by the CCP to conduct surveillance on its users. China affairs commentator Gu He also explained another purpose for the codes: to monitor foreigners' movements inside China.
After entering customs, the QR code will be made for you. When you take the QR code to enter mainland China, you must show the QR code when you travel and board public transit. At this moment, the database will know which bus you took, the time and location. If you stay in a hotel, the hotel will also require you to show the QR code.
The health QR code system is already widely used in China. The system records the user's movements to assess their risk of contracting the virus. It collects detailed data on where users have been, including tracking travel through cities, streets, shopping districts, public spaces, as well as the use of public transit. Former Dalian City police officer Liu Xiaobin says health tracking is optional in the Western world, but not in China.
The so-called health code is voluntary in foreign countries, but when it comes to China, under the rule of the CCP, this thing becomes mandatory. Almost everyone in the country has this health code, and the CCP has been monitoring people in real time through this health code.
In August, NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, obtained internal documents that revealed Chinese police have access to health code data. This means the regime can use the system to suppress dissidents, political prisoners, and human rights defenders. Casey Fleming, CEO of intelligence and strategy firm Black Ops Partners, told the Epoch Times that the CCP is in absolute control in China. There are no checks and balances to prevent abuse of information collected from the health code system.
China provided North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his family with an experimental CCP virus vaccine, a U.S. analyst said Tuesday, citing two unidentified Japanese intelligence sources.
China has provided North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his family with an experimental coronavirus vaccine, a U.S. analyst said on Tuesday. Citing two unidentified Japanese intelligence sources, Harry Kazianis, a North Korea expert at the U.S. think tank Center for the National Interest, said the Kims and several senior North Korean officials had been vaccinated within the last 2 to 3 weeks. He added that it was unclear which company had supplied its drug candidate to the Kims and whether it had proven to be safe. Citing a U.S. medical scientist, Kazianis also said at least 3 Chinese companies were developing a coronavirus vaccine, including Sinovac, CanSinoBio, and Sinopharm. Sinopharm says its candidate has been used by nearly 1 million people in China, but none of the firms are known to have publicly launched late-stage clinical trials of their experimental COVID-19 drugs. However, other experts have expressed doubt that Kim would use an experimental vaccine. North Korea has not confirmed any coronavirus infections, but South Korea's National Intelligence Service has said an outbreak there can't be ruled out. North Korea had trade and people-to-people exchanges with China, where COVID-19 first broke out, before shutting its border in late January. Microsoft said in November 2 North Korean hacking groups had tried to break into the network of vaccine developers in multiple countries without specifying the companies targeted. Sources told Reuters they included British drug maker AstraZeneca. And South Korea said last week it had foiled the North's attempts to hack into its own COVID-19 vaccine makers.
Now we turn to Chinese Communist Party or CCP officials and their reportedly dwindling work ethic. Chinese state-run newspaper People's Daily recently published an article exposing regime officials' apparent lack of motivation at work. The article claims that officials often take the easy way out when encountering challenges. It adds that some seem to abide by the idea of the more one does, the more mistakes one will make, so they would rather do minimal work in order to avoid making mistakes. The article also outlines a potential reason. It says officials' opportunities for corruption, bribery, and pocketing public funds are becoming fewer and fewer, meaning that some officials no longer enjoy the luxuries they used to. As a result, they've become passive toward their jobs. It also pointed out that the situation in China continues to worsen, largely in part because regime officials refuse to take responsibility. That leads to problems escalating and spiraling out of control. Researcher Zhong Yuan, who studies China's political system, also shed light on the situation. He says money and power are the main motivators for CCP officials, adding they love taking on big projects like infrastructure or real estate, so they can receive large grants and loans and make money. And with that money, they can then bribe higher-level officials for promotions. But the U.S.-China trade war has crippled the Chinese economy. Production and exports from what's been called the world's factory have dropped, and the real estate bubble is at the point of bursting. Typical methods like relying on large amounts of government investment to stimulate the economy haven't improved the situation much. On top of that, the U.S. imposed sanctions on the CCP are taking their toll. While many countries are now hardening their stances toward Beijing, Chinese officials' assets overseas are now also at risk. And above all else, CCP head Xi Jinping's increasing dictatorship tactics have made officials at all levels extremely cautious, and many hesitate to speak out or act publicly. Now we turn to Hong Kong. A Hong Kong television station said about 100 staff were affected by a shakeup last Tuesday. 40 workers had been laid off from iCable, including the entire team from the station's award-winning investigative section, News Lancet. The team has often reported on the Hong Kong police violence or the regime in the past year. Wang Lai-ping, deputy chief of the station's China news team, was among those laid off. 10 other members of the team had resigned in protest. The team covers human rights in mainland China and reported from Wuhan on the CCP virus outbreak. The TV station said that they were devoted to adopting various measures to explore new business opportunities. But the move has reignited worries over media freedom in Hong Kong. A journalist from the News Lancet segment who was fired told Reuters he was skeptical of the reason behind the decision. He said it's definitely media censorship. And in the U.S., CCP membership has been put under the spotlight. The CCP mouthpiece China Daily reported Monday that U.S. law enforcement officials recently conducted sudden inspections of Chinese shipping personnel to identify any Chinese Communist Party members. The report says a total of 21 Chinese vessels were inspected as of November 11th. Also, the U.S. has interrogated the crews of 16 Chinese airline flights to the U.S. since September. According to the report, some of the interrogations lasted for hours to find out who on board are CCP members and why they joined the party. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunlin appears so irritated and claims to have made stern negotiations with the U.S. over the issue. But most Chinese people felt happy about the entry ban posed on the CCP members. At the beginning of October, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, issued guidance to deny CCP members entrance to the U.S. Since then, the Chinese keywords for quit the CCP has been spiking on Google Trends in the Chinese region. And visits to the Epoch Times quitting the CCP website has also skyrocketed. The USCIS guidance is believed to be having a significant impact on Chinese Communist Party elites and may exacerbate internal party conflicts. And preliminary estimates say that around 270 million people will be affected by the policy guidance. Now we look toward Australia and what appears to be an act of retaliation towards Beijing. On Tuesday, Australian newspaper The Daily Telegraph featured a photo taken during China's 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre on its front page. It depicts a peaceful protester who was since dubbed the Tank Man, blocking the path of Chinese military vehicles on June 5, 1989. It was captured during student-led non-violent demonstrations in China when unarmed students were gunned down by Chinese troops. Beijing authorities have remained tight-lipped about the man's identity for years. It remains unknown who he was or what happened to him. The eye-catching front page comes after China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs posted a faked photo on Twitter, depicting an Australian soldier preparing to kill an Afghan child, and accusing Australia of killing civilians during the war in Afghanistan. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison called the post repugnant and offensive. He demanded that Beijing apologize and take down the fake image. But the Chinese regime refused, instead asking Australia to apologize to the world. Imitating the Chinese ministry's comment posted with a doctored photo, the Daily Telegraph's headline reads, "Shocked by the murder of Chinese civilians and students by Chinese soldiers. We strongly condemn such acts and call for holding them all accountable." Adding that, P.S. this photo is real. The bold front page comes as China and Australia continue to trade blows. Beijing first began its string of accusations against the country after Australian officials called for an independent investigation into the origins of the CCP virus in Wuhan. New Zealand and France have since showed support for Australia, criticizing the CCP for posting the fake photo. And to Australian wine, Christmas is around the corner. Lawmakers from different countries decided to have a glass of Aussie drop this December. And in a video, they urged millions of people around the world to do the same.
So this December, we are asking you all to join us in standing against Xi Jinping's authoritarian bullying.
By drinking a bottle or two of Australian wine and letting the Chinese Communist Party know that we will not be bullied.
Cheers, and also say no bullying from China.
That's a fine Australian wine.
The Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China consists of more than 200 lawmakers from about 20 countries, aiming to jointly deal with the threat of the CCP. Last month, China imposed high tariffs of over 200% on Australian wine in retaliation to the country for its tough stance on Beijing. Now we look to Southeast Asia. Internal documents reveal Beijing has run scores of public training programs in South and Southeast Asia to expand its influence in the regions. An internal document dated November 1st, 2017 said from 2002 to 2017, Yunnan Police College in southwestern Yunnan province has conducted 115 police training sessions for over 60 countries. Over 2,500 law enforcement officers received the training. The document said the programs had been conducted under the leadership of the CCP's Ministry of Public Security, among others. It highlighted that training sessions were to boost international cooperation on law enforcement and serve China's Belt and Road Initiative in those regions. The document also revealed research projects included a study of mechanisms of preventing secession, infiltration, and subversion by hostile forces in Yunnan frontier regions. During these years, the regime has continued its cooperation with ASEAN, an association of Southeast Asian nations. According to state media, ASEAN countries in 2016 agreed to establish a China-ASEAN Law Enforcement Academy to be set up by the Yunnan Provincial Police College. China committed to provide free short and midterm training for 2,000 police officers from the ASEAN region from 2016 to 2020. China commentator Li Lingyi noted that in the same region of the police training program, the regime's abduction of Chinese dissidents also increased. 5 Chinese pro-democracy activists disappeared in Thailand and Myanmar since 2015, only then to emerge detained in China. This included a Hong Kong citizen who also had a Swedish passport. All of this was due to joint efforts between the Chinese security officials and local police. Another Chinese activist was arrested in Thailand by Chinese security officials and later extradited to China. Last November, Xinjiang, a Chinese activist, was arrested by Thai and Chinese police at his home in Bangkok. He was then sent to immigration detention after the United Nations office in Thailand had already accepted his refugee application. He was later released after pressure from the international community. He has since moved to New Zealand. The U.S. is imposing sanctions on another Chinese firm. It's accused of supporting Venezuela's socialist dictator's efforts to undermine democracy. The Treasury Department said the China National Electronics Import-Export Corporation supported the leftist regime of Nicolas Maduro in its efforts to restrict internet service and conduct digital surveillance and cyber operations against political opponents. Washington in January 2019 recognized Venezuelan opposition politician Juan Guaido as the nation's rightful leader. Maduro's 2018 re-election is widely described as fraudulent. Venezuelans have said for years that their computers and phones cannot access certain websites linked to the opposition or some local news agencies that openly criticize the government. The Treasury said the Chinese company had been supporting the Maduro regime since 2017. The U.S. is accusing China of violating UN sanctions on North Korea. Deputy Assistant Secretary for North Korea, Alex Wang, accused China of trying to undo UN sanctions aimed at persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. Wang said China had continued to host at least 20,000 North Korean laborers in violation of UN bans. He added that in the past year, the U.S. had observed ships carrying prohibited coal or other sanctioned goods from North Korea to China on over 500 separate occasions. Wang also says China is allowing its companies to trade prohibited goods with North Korea. That's including industrial machinery, vehicles, sand, and gravel. The U.S. has offered up to $5 million in rewards for information about sanctions evasion. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching. But before you go, we have some exciting news. I'm launching a separate channel called The Deep Dive, where we delve deep into topics of current interest. Find me there, and for the rest of you, I'll see you tomorrow.